there's not 32 guys better than me.
Still, you still feel the exact same.
Cam.
On my soul.
Cam.
On my soul. On my soul.
There was a time where number 1 in black and blue was the most feared man on every field he stepped on. He was arguably the most popular player in the entire NFL, and then just a couple years later he fell off, got released by his team, and is currently not on an NFL roster. And this can lead people to question how good Cam Newton really was. In college, Cam Newton would win the Heisman Trophy with Auburn, and was one of the most electric college quarterbacks we have ever seen. And with his freakish size and athleticism, he was believed to be a generational talent coming out of the draft, and this would be backed by the fact that the Panthers took him with the first overall draft pick in 2011.
With the first pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Carolina Panthers select Cam Newton, quarterback, Auburn.
Cam Newton would start his NFL career with a bang. He threw for 422 yards and 2 touchdowns in his NFL debut against the Cardinals, 422 passing yards being an NFL record for a rookie's debut. And he followed this up with another 400-yard passing game against Green Bay, but he had 3 interceptions this game in a 7-point loss. Even though this was just his second game in his NFL career in his rookie season, 3 interceptions in a game is pretty crazy, and ball security was something that he would struggle throughout his entire career, and he was showing those signs early. He would get his first career victory in week 3 against Jacksonville, where he had a mediocre game, throwing for 158 yards and a touchdown. As a team, obviously, since the Panthers had the number 1 overall draft pick, they were not a very good team for Cam to come into. So it makes sense that as a rookie, Cam Newton was only able to lead the Panthers to 6 wins. But Cam Newton would throw for 4,000 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and a poor 17 interceptions. Then he would add another 700 yards rushing and 14 touchdowns on the ground, which would be the most rushing touchdowns in his entire career. And this would make Cam the first ever quarterback with double-digit passing and rushing touchdowns. This would be good enough to earn Cam Rookie of the Year and make the Pro Bowl, and he had a lot of clear flaws throwing the ball, but as a rookie, ball security and decision making are usually something that they struggle with, and he did show a lot of promise and potential, but this horrendous touchdown to interception ratio would be something that would be evident throughout his entire career. Going into Cam Newton's sophomore season, Cam was supposed to make a leap, but Cam Newton statistically basically remained the same exact player, and they only won 1 more game, finishing the season with a 7-9 record. Cam really did not progress much in his sophomore season, but can you really blame him when the Panthers gave him absolutely nothing to work with? This would be another common theme throughout Cam Newton's career. Outside of Greg Olsen, he only had a 33-year-old Steve Smith and Brandon LaFell as his primary targets. So is it really fair to ask Cam Newton to do a whole lot through the air when he has nobody to give the ball to? But Cam Newton's best game in 2012 would come against Philly, where he would throw for 306 yards, 2 touchdowns, and rush for 52 yards on the ground, and 2 rushing touchdowns, resulting in a win. This was a massive win for Cam Newton because the Panthers were on a terrible losing streak leading up to this game. They only won 1 out of their last 8 games before this. But this win would spark something with the Panthers. They really started to click after this game, because after they won 4 out of their last 5 games to end the season, and this would give them a lot of momentum to go into next year. And again, throughout the 2012 season, ball security was something Cam Newton struggled with. His touchdown to interception ratio again was poor. And going into the 2013 season, the Panthers looked to have a lot of momentum ending the 2012 season, but they started off rocky in 2013, losing both of their first 2 games, and Cam Newton honestly struggled in both of them. He threw for less than 250 yards in each game. It looked like maybe he's still not improving as a passer in his 3rd season in the NFL, and maybe you could still blame the Panthers for this because they still did not give Cam Newton any better weapons to work with. But after their 2 losses to open the season, something would change for the Panthers, and they came out booming against the New York Giants in week 3, where they would blow them out 38-0, and Cam Newton would have 4 total touchdowns, 3 passing and 1 rushing. And after this blowout victory against the Giants, the Panthers would only lose 2 more games the entire season. But things for Cam Newton were only getting more interesting, because this season Cam Newton would be selected to the Pro Bowl, but if you look at his numbers, they were not very great. I'm not sure if they were Pro Bowl caliber. He had under 4,000 total yards, rushing and passing both are included, 24 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, again a horrible ratio. So he is now in his 3rd season in the NFL, and he has not gotten much smarter or safer with the ball. But the Panthers as a whole team got a lot better this year, largely due to the defense. At this point in Cam Newton's career, I think he was just a turnover-prone quarterback with a lot of athleticism who still has not made the leap as a passer. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt right now because he still had no weapons to work with in Carolina. The Panthers finished with the 2 seed in the NFC, giving them a 1st-round bye, and they would play the 49ers in the divisional round of the playoffs. And in Cam Newton's first game of his playoff career, he looked completely outmatched by Colin Kaepernick. Cam threw for 2 interceptions to 1 touchdown and 267 yards in a 23-10 loss. But the Panthers and Cam Newton finally had something to carry into the 2014 season. And this would be the first time the Panthers attempted to give Cam Newton real weapons. They would draft Kelvin Benjamin this year, who looked to be a very promising rookie wide receiver. But even in doing so, Cam Newton did not look to improve as a passer this year. Cam had a very underwhelming season this year, throwing for 3,100 yards and 18 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. He is basically a lock to have double-digit interceptions and has not even had a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio yet. He had another 500 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns on the ground, but this was the first season in Cam Newton's career where he didn't play every single game. He missed the first game of the season from a fractured rib injury that he suffered in the preseason, and he would miss another game later that season after getting in a car accident. Talking about Cam Newton and injuries is a common theme in why some people think that his career fell off, and we'll definitely touch on that more later, but if you seriously look at his career up until this point, he has not been spectacular by any means. He didn't make the Pro Bowl this season, and the Panthers regressed heavily, only winning 5 games in Cam Newton's 14 starts. But following his disappointing 2014 season, Super Cam would be born in 2015. Cam exploded this year, having by far the best season of his NFL career, winning MVP and leading his team to a Super Bowl. Cam Newton was the most popular player in football by far this year. I don't think it was even close. He popularized the dab, which was pretty much the most popular dance move in the entire world this year. He would become known as Super Cam throughout the entire league. And what made this more impressive is the fact that the Panthers already had lackluster weapons, but Kelvin Benjamin tore his ACL, so he did not even play this season. So Cam Newton was basically out there throwing to Walmart employees. Ted Ginn Jr. was the leading receiver on this team. Cam still would not crack 4,000 passing yards this season, but he threw for a career high 35 passing touchdowns to 10 interceptions, by far the best ratio of his career. This was the first time in his career he had better than a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and he actually had better than a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. On top of that, he had 600 yards rushing and 10 rushing touchdowns. He was much smarter with the ball this season, and maybe he finally made the leap, becoming a better decision maker, a smarter quarterback, and a better passer. His best games of the season were against Washington and New York, where he would throw for 5 touchdowns and no interceptions in both games. He led the Panthers to a 15-to-1 record in the NFL, which easily got them the #1 seed and the best record in football. The Panthers obviously had a bye week, so in the divisional round they would face off against the Seahawks. Cam Newton wasn't necessarily impressive in this game, but the Panthers would jump to an early 14-0 lead to end the first quarter from a Luke Kuechly pick 6 and a Jonathan Stewart rushing touchdown. This game was getting out of hand in the second quarter as Jonathan Stewart had another rushing touchdown and Cam Newton threw his only touchdown of the game to Greg Olsen. So the Panthers would be up 31-0 at halftime, but they wouldn't score for the rest of the game, and the Seahawks would take advantage of that, making the game interesting. Russell Wilson threw 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, which would cut the lead to 31-14 going into the fourth quarter. But still, it would look like the Panthers had this game in the bag, still being up 17 points. But Carolina would struggle heavily. They punted the ball 4 straight drives, and Russ would throw another touchdown to Jermaine Kearse in the fourth quarter and score a late field goal to cut the lead to 31-24, only a 7-point game. Unfortunately for Seattle, it was too little too late. They would have to attempt an onside kick, which would be unsuccessful, and this would be the first drive of the entire second half where the Panthers didn't end it with a punt, and that's because they kneeled the clock out. The NFC Championship against the Cardinals would be a different story. The Panthers scored on each of their first 3 drives, meanwhile the Cardinals punted on their first 3, so the Panthers had a 17-0 lead to end the first quarter. Just like they did against Seattle, they came out dominating early. The second quarter was less dominant. Cam Newton would score a rushing touchdown, but towards the end of the half, Cam Newton and Carson Palmer would both trade interceptions on back-to-back drives, but the Panthers would still go up 24-7 at halftime. Would the Panthers melt down like they did in the second half against the Seahawks, or will they put the game away? Well, the Panthers would score on both of their 2 drives in the third quarter, while the Cardinals would punt on their only drive of the third quarter. And going into the fourth, the game was pretty much over. The Panthers were up 34-7. Cam Newton would add another touchdown through the air, and Luke Kuechly would get a pick 6 in the fourth quarter. Panthers won this game pretty easily, 49-15, and this was definitely Cam Newton's best playoff performance of his career up until this point. The Panthers would go against Peyton Manning and the Broncos in the Super Bowl. For the Panthers, this game did not go as planned. They would fall to an early 10-0 deficit after a Von Miller strip sack on Cam Newton that resulted in a touchdown. But in the second quarter, Jonathan Stewart would rush for a 1-yard touchdown, giving the Panthers their first score of the game. And following a Denver field goal, the most controversial play of the game would occur, and the most controversial play of Cam Newton's career, where it looked like in the Super Bowl, he gave up on a play where he could have easily recovered a fumble if he just dived on the ball. Instead, he backed away from it. I mean, I guess it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that if he did dive on it, he would recover it, and this is an effort that you have to make in the Super Bowl. But the Broncos would recover, and Cam Newton and the Panthers had 2 attempts in the fourth quarter, down 10-16, after forcing back-to-back punts to take a lead, and the Panthers would fail. They punted on their first attempt, and Cam Newton fumbled on their second attempt. attempt. The Broncos would score off of this turnover, which would put the game out of reach, giving the Broncos the 24-10 victory in the Super Bowl over the Panthers. The final score looked like it wasn't very competitive, but the Panthers definitely had a chance to win. The O-line for Cam Newton definitely played terribly, but if Cam still played at that MVP level that he played at the entire season, even just 80% of that, the Panthers could have easily won this game. But maybe Cam was just a postseason choker, and unfortunately, Cam Newton would never return to this level of play again. The Panthers and Broncos would rematch week 1 of the 2016 NFL season, giving Cam Newton a chance at revenge. But in Cam Newton's revenge game, he would throw for less than 200 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Obviously, this performance was not good enough to give them the win, but following the week 1 loss to Denver, Cam Newton would face the Niners, where he would have his best game of the season, throwing for 4 touchdowns and nearly 400 yards. This is why it's really confusing about Cam Newton. He can have games like this, then he'll have games where he throws for 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions, and it just makes it so hard to tell what he really is as a player. But after his best game of the season, he would only throw for 14 more touchdowns the rest of the year, and he would only miss 1 game this season. And he would throw 12 interceptions, including a week 3 loss where he threw 3 interceptions and no touchdowns against Minnesota. The Panthers and Cam Newton both regressed heavily this year, going from 15-1 in 2015 to 6-10 in 2016, with Cam finishing with a 19-14 touchdown to interception ratio, again showing his inconsistency throwing the ball and his poor decision making. And on top of this poor season throwing the ball, he had the worst year of his career rushing the ball, only 4 yards per carry on under 400 rushing yards. 2017 was another interesting season for Cam Newton. The Panthers team success was back, and they would win 11 games this season, but individually Cam Newton was not back to the superstar level that he was at 2015. He threw for the most interceptions of his career since his rookie season, 16. He just cannot protect the football. On top of throwing for 16 interceptions, he would only throw for 22 touchdowns and 3,300 yards. But at least he did have something going for him. He had his best season of his career rushing the football, 750 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 5.4 yards per carry. Cam had 3 games this season where he threw for 3 interceptions, and in all 3 of those games combined, he only had 2 passing touchdowns. The lows are low, but he also did have a couple great games. A game against Detroit where he threw for 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, and then against Green Bay where he threw for 4 touchdowns and no interceptions.
Newton drops straight back, throws a crossing route, McCaffrey.
The trend with Cam Newton appears that he either plays great or awful, but the Panthers would make the playoffs this year, and they played against the Saints in the wild card round. And despite the inconsistent season that Cam Newton had, and his previous lack of success in the playoffs, and his previous disappointments in the playoffs, Cam actually played great in this game. The Panthers were not able to score a touchdown in the first half. They would score 3 field goals, going down 21-9 at halftime, but in the second half, Cam Newton would make the game competitive, leading the Panthers to another field goal on their opening drive, but they would be down 24-12 going into the 4th quarter. But Cam would open up that 4th quarter, throwing a touchdown pass to Greg Olsen for Carolina's first touchdown of the game, putting the game within reach, the Panthers only down 5. And on the following drive, the Panthers would stop the Saints. Cam had a chance to take the lead for the first time this game, but got injured after he took a sack, and Derek Anderson would have to come in the game and was not able to do anything. This drive would end in a 3-and-out, and the Saints would capitalize off of this, making the game a 2-possession lead. Cam Newton did return to the game on the following drive, and he threw a 6-yard pass to CMC, who would do the rest. He took it 50 yards for a touchdown, putting the Panthers down 5 again. And the Panthers looked like they could win this, as Drew Brees threw a pick on the following drive, and the Panthers had a chance to take a lead within 2 minutes in the game. They were clicking to start off this drive. They would gain 43 yards in their first 3 plays of the drive, but then Cam threw 3 straight incompletions, and on 4th down he would take a sack, giving the Saints the win. Cam Newton performed well despite the loss, but unfortunately this would be the last time in his career he would make the playoffs. 2018 was the last season that Cam Newton played anything close to good. Unfortunately though, the Panthers were not a good team. They only won 7 games this season, and Cam would still struggle with his decision making. He threw 13 interceptions, and even had a game against Tampa where he threw for 4 interceptions. He finished with just under 3,400 passing yards and had a poor 24-13 touchdown to interception ratio, and had a career low 4 rushing touchdowns. This was arguably the worst season of his career up until this point. I would say that 2014 was a little bit worse, but this would be a close second. And Unfortunately for Cam Newton, things would not get better. In 2019, Cam Newton would suffer with injury. He would only play 2 games this season, throwing for 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. He suffered a Lisfranc fracture, which would sideline him for the rest of the season, and this would end his stretch with the Carolina Panthers, as they would end up releasing him. In 2020, the New England Patriots would pick up Cam Newton following Tom Brady's departure, being the first quarterback to follow up after the GOAT and the legacy of the Patriots dynasty, which is a ton of pressure. Not to mention, this was also during the lockdown season. Cam Newton would perform poorly in week 1, only throwing for 155 yards and no touchdowns against Miami, but they still got the W. And in week 2, Cam Newton would have his best game as a Patriot, where he would throw for basically 400 passing yards, a touchdown, and rushing for 2. But with the game on the line, the Seahawks would stop Cam on a goal line rush, and the Patriots would lose 35-30 in a thriller. Cam Newton looked like he was starting to get the hang of things with New England, but right as that was happening, he would end up getting the infection and would miss week 4 against the Chiefs. He appeared to have fallen behind due to this and really only had 2 more games for the rest of the season against Houston and against the Jets, where he threw for 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. The Patriots would only win 7 games, but on the bright side of things, Cam had the most rushing touchdowns since his rookie year, 12. The Patriots ended up drafting Mac Jones that season, and Cam Newton would be released, ending his short stint in New England. Cam Newton didn't start the 2021 season on a roster, and the Panthers were not doing good, so in the middle of the season, the Panthers took another chance and signed Cam Newton back, and Cam would make his first appearance with Carolina against the Cardinals, and he would rush for a touchdown. He would also throw for a touchdown. But the Panthers dominated the Cardinals 34-10, and Cam Newton would rush for a touchdown in each of his next 4 games, but the Panthers wouldn't win another game for the rest of the season, and Cam would get benched after 5 starts. Cam would also get cut in the offseason and hasn't been on a roster since then. Cam Newton definitely has one of the most interesting careers in NFL history, and I think the best way to look at his career as a whole is taking away his best season and his worst season, and that shows who he really is as a player. And to me, I think he's overrated, and contradictory to Cam, I do think that there are 32 guys better than him, but let me know what your guys' conclusion is. How do you guys think Cam Newton really was?